So thank you for that introduction. I'd like to see everybody. So I'm going to try to find a stance whereby you can hear me and I can see you. How we doing? Okay. So the way, first of all, the way we're going to proceed is I've written out about 15 minutes because I have so much to say. And if you just talk extemporaneously, it takes twice as long. Then I'm going to show slides. And then I'm going to have a little epilogue because it's Kafka, Kahlo, and me. But the me is the most recent part, and it's the shortest so far. Have a little modesty, but that is what I'm working on. And so I'm going to start now the more formal aspect of it. I start with a poem. Francie always used to start all the lunch and learns with poems. And so I decided that I would have a poem called Invitation. Oh, do you have time to linger for just a little while out of your busy and very important day for the goldfinches that have gathered in a field of thistles for a musical battle to see who can sing the highest note or the lowest or the most expressive of mirth or the most tender. Their strong, blunt beaks drink the air as they strive melodiously, and not for your sake, and not for mine, and not for the sake of winning, but for sheer delight and gratitude. Believe us, they say, it is a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in the broken world. I beg of you, do not walk by without pausing to attend this rather ridiculous performance. It could mean something. It could mean everything. It could be what Rilke meant when he wrote, "You must change your life." That's by Mary Oliver. This poem I offer as my shehechianu, my prayer of gratitude that all of us gathered here have reached this day, joining in community at a moment when our world is even more broken than any of us could have imagined. It is my way of inviting you to join me in the sheer delight and gratitude of being alive together. But unlike the birds in the poem, I am not offering a performance. I invited you here to share with you what I have learned about Kafka and Kahlo in the last many decades, as you've heard. It is my hope that by making my stake in my project visible, you may begin to think about what is your stake, what have been your connections to the things that have interested you, to your work or to your projects. I always like to share the things I'm thinking about and that become meaningful. These 20th century artists have become icons of our time, and their popularity only continues to grow. The term Kafkaesque has entered all of the Western world and even the non-Western languages, and it signals a world gone awry, a world that maintains its surface normality but has become incomprehensible to the ordinary human. It is familiar even to those who've never read a word of Kafka. It's been on TV, it's been on shows like The Wire. People are using it. Kahlo's paintings, especially the self-portraits, which constitute fully 1/3 of all of her work, have also become incredibly popular. And you can find images of her, even images of her broken self on coffee cups and postage stamps. The word Kahlo-esque has entered the language, but it's very little used. The word that's mostly used to describe Kahlo is Kahlomania. She's so popular that it's a mania. Far from elevating her, this makes her work seem much less significant. For mania suggests a fad, something that is temporarily fashionable but will fade away quickly. I think you can see the effects of gender already palpable in this comparison. Because so many of the works of Kafka and Kahlo depict very painful situations, and there are many images in her paintings and in his work of blood, of wounds, and a sense of helplessness. I'm going to begin with one of my strongest and most deeply held conclusions. Kafka and Kahlo, who each suffered a great deal of physical and psychic pain, kept themselves alive by making art. It was through their art that they survived. Making art provided them with a holding space in the sense that was suggested by some of you may know the work of D.W. Winnicott, the British psychologist, who posited that all children need a safe, supportive environment, most often provided by a good enough caretaker, in which the child can flourish and development. But neither Kafka nor Kahlo's early years offered such a space, so they created it for themselves. Kafka said, "I am nothing but literature." Kahlo said, "I never painted my dreams. I painted my own reality." Many people's response to hearing about my Kafka-Kahlo work respond with skepticism. This isn't altogether surprising because there are many differences that exist between the two, and I'm just going to very briefly, like thumbnail sketches, make these artists be alive. Kafka was born male in 1883 in Prague. Czech was the dominant language of his country, but his family was Jewish, and they were part of a German-speaking Jewish community. So he was a minority within a minority. He died in 1924. His main medium was writing, but he also made sketches of himself, some of which I'll show you here, and he called himself someone for whom seeing was extremely important. Kahlo was born female in 1907 in Mexico City. Spanish was the language of the country. Her father was born in Germany, and he migrated to Mexico when he was only 19. Her mother was a hybrid. She was of Spanish, European, and indigenous Indian heritage. Kahlo's medium was painting, but she wrote a great deal in writing, and she kept an amazing diary, a visual diary, that I will show you a little bit from. It's very different from the style that you may be familiar with. It was an epiphany. This is the question I'm most often asked. How did you get to think about these two together? An epiphany led me to see the confluences of their work. Confluence, and it's not influence, but confluence, means the coming together of things that seem very different from each other, but when you look at them more closely, side by side, each one of them looks different when they're put next to the other, and you learn something new about each of them. I also see them as kindred spirits. My epiphany happened while I was teaching a women's studies class, long after I have done the work on Kafka and the Yiddish theater, where I showed that Kafka got his dramatic style that really made him famous from seeing Yiddish plays in Prague, brought to Prague by Polish actors in Yiddish. That's a whole other story. But after that work, Kafka obviously stayed in my mind. Fast forward a few years, I'm now teaching women's studies. It's a very heady time. We're discovering and rediscovering writers and painters who had been known in their lifetime, but were no longer known. And Frida Kahlo, of course, if she was known at all in those years, was known only as Diego Rivera's wife. But mostly her name was, as Virginia Woolf said, written on water. Poets' names are written on water. And I also think that her paintings, by comparison to most other male art, are very small, with tiny brushstrokes. And I think the woman-centered subject matter, the smallness of the paintings, all made them disappear more quickly than perhaps other art did. One day I was showing her self-portrait, The Broken Column, And that's going to be the first, it was up here on the screen a little while we were testing out this. I'll show it to you, the first one, when I finish this introduction. So keep in mind its importance. She is nude, she is split open, and there are nails all over her body. And a corset is holding her body that is held up also by a column inside the brokenness of the body itself. And as I was showing this painting in the context of Frida Kahlo, the name Franz Kafka popped into my head. And although it was really strange in a women's studies class, I said it aloud, Franz Kafka. And then I was suddenly seeing the imagery of Kafka's writings. Many of you may know The Trial and maybe even The Metamorphosis or The Castle, but and of course The Trial, this is not giving away a secret, ends in the murder, the stabbing of the Joseph K., who never does find out what he's accused of. But the other writings, many other writings, are full of stabbings, of men stabbing other men with knives, with canes. And it's not like I could show this by reading you one thing. It really permeates his life. And it also has other implications. It has an erotic element as well. So I'm showing this self-portrait. And then what also connected me to Kafka with Kahlo is that I looked at that image and it reminded me of an image by El Greco of Saint Sebastian. Maybe some of you have seen that image where he has arrows piercing his body. Saint Sebastian is a Christian martyr who was very courageous, who was supposed to have died because he was espousing Christianity at a time that the Romans did not allow it yet, but he survived. And I think Kahlo used that image because she, like Saint Sebastian, survived, and these nails in her body was her way of making visible the physical wounds and the psychological wounds that she had. I know I haven't portrayed them yet. This is not necessarily a linear, but I think you can follow my train of thought. So I thought of the Saint Sebastian, then I thought of Kafka, and many of you may know the short story, In the Penal Colony, which I don't recommend. It's a really gory story, and I only have to look at it now and then when I'm going to give a talk. But it is about someone who's imprisoned, and he's punished by being laid down in a bed, like a bed, and then these nails on this machine are supposed to write on his body what he did wrong. So it's a very awful story, but I think Kafka, again, was using the violence to the physical body to also talk about the pain that he was physically and psychologically suffering from. So now we go on to, in her mind, and you'll see in these images, very many woundings, blood, and this is both what she literally went through, but also her psyche shown through these images. So then I began studying their lives, because even though I knew each of their work, I didn't know it in depth, and I really studied their lives very closely, and I found many either parallels or mirror images, because some of what is happening to Kafka and Kahlo have to do with their gender. I used to refer to this study as wounds of gender, because of their different gender identity and way of living in the world, they responded differently to similar things. Attachment is one of those issues, just to jump ahead. So I'm going to give a few facts that I found in their lives that these artists had to work with or deal with. First of all, they both had grieving and distracted mothers. I won't go into the details, but trust me, there was death in both of their families in different ways, particularly for the mothers. And each was put very young into the hands of servants who did not necessarily give their charges warmth or support. Kahlo's wet nurse actually turned out to be alcoholic, so she had to be removed from her. And Kafka said he got beatings and perhaps even some sexual abuse from some of the people who were caretaking him. And both their fathers were rather severe. Kafka's father really was punitive psychologically more than anything. But Kahlo's father was at sometimes a caretaker, but he may have overstepped his role as caretaker and been somewhat abusive. I have a whole essay dedicated to that aspect. And Kahlo's father also had epilepsy, and she often ended up sort of taking care of him when he had a fit. So these were things that were marked both of them. They were both deprived of a certain kind of holding early in life, and this really did make attachment issues for both of them. And I've already talked about the pains that they had, physical and psychological. They also showed sex gender differences from what was culturally expected of them very early on. They both suffered from complex PTSD with resulting feelings of isolation, shame, guilt, and even a certain amount of self-blame. Kafka had been taunted in his childhood because he was Jewish. Prague was very anti-Semitic, and there were riots against Jewish storefronts. His father was sometimes spared that because he spoke Czech, and that he also spoke Czech in addition to German. And Kahlo, she had this polio when she was only 6 years old, ended her up. She was in bed for many months and ended up with a leg that was thinner than the others and shorter than the other, so that she was called by the kids peg leg and actually made fun of. And at 18, of course, she had the horrible bus accident that most of you have heard about, where her pelvis was broken, her back was, they did not expect her to live. And the fact that she lived, like Saint Sebastian, was something of a miracle. They both died young in their 40s. And I'll say a little bit more specific about the sex gender issues. They both fell in love quite early with a person of the same sex. Kafka had written letters to this person, but he was very much ashamed of these feelings. And if you look at Kafka's writings, both his diaries, his letters, he tried to hide this. And one of the themes that goes through all of his writing is not only shame, but the word dirty, the word really bad language about his own self. And I believe, and I'm not the only one, in fact, I was one of the early ones who saw this, but then the men began writing about it, and it's their writing that has sort of gotten more press. But it is now, when I first said this sort of thing in Kafka at the Modern Language Association, I was practically shunned myself, because I could, do you dare say something like this, that a great artist, famous artist, had homosexual desires? I don't believe, as far as I can tell, that he ever acted on them, or if he did, he never even wrote about that in his diaries. But he did, some people do believe he acted on it, but could never quite come to terms with it in the society in which he lived. And so as a result, in a way, Kafka ended up trying to be heterosexual. He really was engaged to a woman he had only met once. She lived in Berlin, but he wrote her a letter, and before you knew it, they're engaged to be married. He was desperate to live a, quote, normal heterosexual life with children, which would show that he was a real man, and he would also be acting out what was required of a Jewish male at that time. His family was quite middle class. Kahlo, on the other hand, I'm going to show you a picture of her. At 16, she dressed in drag, and she has a picture of her with her family, her bourgeois family, and she's in a man's outfit in drag. She thumbed her nose. She was quite rebellious from early on. She had affairs with men and women, but when she married Diego, when she was only 21, and he's like more than 20 years older than she is, and he's unfaithful even on their wedding day, as this was shown in the film about Kahlo. He was a terrible, terrible womanizer, and she could never, ever let go of him. So in a way, that is a very female response to needing someone to complete her. They were both looking for wholeness, but she also felt she needed to have him in order to feel complete. Of course, he also looked after her had more money than she or her family did. So that might be another part of it. But even after she divorced him on in her life, after he had an affair with her sister, her favorite younger sister, they remarried a year later but they lived more separate than they had. She asked him, no more intercourse, and I'm not going to take any money from you. Whether she was able to do it is not clear because she was also very sick. Okay, let's see what else I want to say. Yes, this is very important. Their hybridity was important to both of them. She being European and Mexican, indigenous, and he being Jewish, but not knowing how to be Jewish and to be Jewish in a world that was basically Christian. So hybridity was a very important factor, and some of you here may even have gone to see the exhibit in New York City. It was based on Kahlo's Jewishness, where you see the picture which I took out of this slideshow because I have far too many slides, where she tries to trace her lineage, showing the European side and the Indian side. And that was, of course, important to the shame, and it was true for Kafka. But as it turns out, two researchers in Germany did some work on her father's history because he was quite a well-known photographer in Mexico at the time. And so people are getting interested in him. And they discovered that they could not find any Jewish roots whatsoever, that it's a Protestant lineage, it's inscribed in Bibles and in church documents. And of course, this was shortly after I finished my dissertation. And of course, it was not only was I shocked because it changed my understanding of Kahlo, but it really was almost like a kind of a epistemological trauma. I mean, it was far ahead of my time. Who can I believe? How do we know what we know? And I did find out how this got started. There was a biography by a friend of Diego Rivera who said kind of by the by, oh yes, and there in the house was the daughter of that Jewish Hungarian German photographer. I mean, it was as casual as that. And her main biographer, Hayden Herrera, maybe many of you have read the big biography, just took that as gospel. And so we had to really rethink. Now, some people believe that she wanted to present herself as Jewish because of World War II, because of the Nazis, because her father was German. He always spoke with an accent, a German accent. You don't get rid of that easily. And even though he was only 19 when he came. And so she had many, many Jewish friends because she was very politically active and communist. There were many Jews who escaped the United States and, you know, the McCarthy period, and earlier on than that had escaped from Europe. And so as a result, she wanted not to be German and made herself appear to be Jewish. And if some of you know that, I'm not showing it, this famous portrait of her father, and it's just a portrait of him, very prim and proper. And underneath is a script inscribed, "To my brave father who went through much and fought against Hitler." Now, her father was totally apolitical and had actually told her not to be political, that it was dangerous, but she clearly wanted to make it seem that he was more political than he was. So, so now understanding these things, I think we're ready to turn to the slides. I will just, before I show the slides, just reiterate, it was their art that kept them alive and gave them hope. In spite of frequent depression, pain, and despair, they both were suicidal at times. You can find that in their diaries, in their letters, and that it took a lot of courage for them to speak the truth of their pain through their art, which is, and then we, the reader, viewer, of course, have to experience in order to be empathic toward them. I'll just turn to the slides with this quote, which could also describe Frida Kahlo's work. He said, Kafka said, "A book should be an axe to break the frozen sea within us." So it's this frozen sea, or what's beneath the frozen sea, that we're going to have a look at. So, and if you have questions, don't ask them now. Write them on your napkin if you don't have anything else, because we will leave time for questions. But because I want to show, I'm going to show all the slides. It's going to be a little frustrating because I decided instead of focusing only on a few, I'm going to try to show you the breadth of them. And that means that some of them I'm going to go by very, very quickly. I can't because I have to, if you can't see, if this is in your way, you have to move your chair. Because this is attached to the other machine and we can't move my computer because does this have to be up here, by the way?
Good question.
Well, no, don't close it because then I won't be able to.
Oh, but you want to.
I have to see them. Okay, how's that? Is that better? No, that's worse. Oh, this is better. Okay, here. Is that better? Okay, now I can still see them. I hope it will still. So this is the painting I was talking about. By the way, I was thinking of saying something very Kafkaesque. We're lucky. It's not a sunny day. It's a dark, cloudy day. So the slides will show up well. So this is that painting I was talking about, which references Saint Sebastian with the arrows in his body, where her entire body is covered with these nails. The bleak background is the lava flows that are in Mexico, but she used them especially to create mood. There's not a tree in sight, there's nothing green. It's a very bleak kind of picture. And I read somewhere that she said she would have also kept her, although Saint Sebastian did have a little ribbon over his penis. She said, I would have made myself completely naked, but that would have attracted people's attention more than my nails. And she wanted the pain to be the thing focused on. Okay. It didn't move. Help, help. Oh, I didn't put it on. Haha. Okay. I just wanted to show you quickly what they look like. And while I was studying them, it turns out that they really look like they could be brother and sister. They are from a certain part of Europe, and they certainly have a very similar looking at you fully in the eye. These are when they were young, and I just wanted you to see who we're talking about. This is from Kafka's notebooks, and I wanted to give you the sense of this picture is about the torture machine that ends up in the penal colony. But I wanted you to see how he uses stick figures. The figure on the left, yeah, I can do this, is a split self. So there is in these artists a split within the self, but there's also a second figure who is also Kafka. And this split into two is both an externalized split within the self, but both are true, and both are searching for wholeness. So I'm going to read you something by Kafka, which obviously reading would take a lot of time. So I can't, it would elongate this too much. So I'm going to read you one thing from, it's kind of a short piece that encapsulates Kafka's, what the doubleness means to him and how it creates a helplessness in him. It's called The Spring. He always writes in that, often writes in the third person, he is thirsty and is cut off from the spring only by a clump of bushes. But he is divided. One part overlooks the whole, sees that he is standing here and that the spring is just beside him. But another part notices nothing, has at most a slight suspicion that the first part sees everything. But as he notices nothing, he cannot drink. So it's very convoluted, and there is the search for wholeness, but the inability to actually ever get there. Just keep this in mind. Okay, I wanted to show you, because we've talked about attachment, here are some images. On the left is Kafka and the woman he was engaged to for 5 years who lived in Berlin. And he really, really desperately, you can see in his letters, he sometimes wrote 5 letters a day to her. And he is so ambivalent. It's like in the Thirst. He's thirsty, he wants to do this, but he can't. He even writes in one of his diaries, intercourse as punishment for being together. And he does talk about not really ever having been with a woman except 2 prostitutes that his father took him to when he was very young. So there is, and the attempt, he said he not only couldn't he do the sexual part, he couldn't do the living bourgeois part. He said, when he said, I'm nothing but literature, he really was worried that if he married and were able to have children, that he would lose himself entirely, that he would lose his creativity and because he said, I would like to, he wrote to his fiance, I will live like a monk, more isolated even than a monk. So, it's pretty clear what he's saying. And Kahlo there, I wanted to show you this painting, which shows her as the good, it's an early painting after their wedding. She is the good wifey, and he is holding the paintbrushes, but up above is a little ribbon that says, this was painted by Frida Kahlo in the year so-and-so. So she found ways around asserting herself much more in a way than Kafka did, because she was more willing to be flamboyant in some ways. Okay, this is one of the most famous paintings that has gotten a lot of play. And basically, we're talking here about the split. And this is a split that's repeated in many of her paintings. The person on the right is the whole Frida. She is the fully Mexican, the fully authentic one. If you look at the way they're sitting, the Mexican Frida sitting with her legs far apart, like you're never supposed to sit if you're a girl. It's one of the first things you're taught, at least it used to be, but probably still is. And her heart is whole, and she is holding, and the Frida that's in European garb is with a damaged heart. By this time, he has betrayed her many times. She has had many surgeries that have pained her. She is stanching the blood, but if you look carefully, and of course there's that scissor near her genitals, but which is ominous, but if you look at what happens to the blood, mistake. Okay, the blood becomes flowers as they come down. It goes into the embroidery. So in a way, she's herself making the pain and wound into something beautiful, even in front of her. She speaks often in very encoded ways. Here is a later picture where she has had even more surgeries, even more pain, but she's still, the name of this painting and what she's holding on the flag says, Tree of Hope, Hold Firm. That was the name of a popular song which she often used. And of course, the one Frida who is Mexican, who no longer needs any of the corsets, she's still behind earth that doesn't have growth on it, but she is red. Some people suggest that the red of her dress is a transmutation of all the blood that she herself lived through and with. And then the other side, we have all the clear wounds. The woman, her other self, has turned to the wall, which often happens when people are ready to die. Yet she's saying, Tree of Hope, hold firm. So there's that struggle continually between life and death, between wholeness. And I'm reminded, of course, of Kafka, who said, there's plenty, when someone asked him about hope, he said, there's plenty of hope, just not for us. And I think that's very funny. I don't know, maybe you have to live with Kafka a long time to find the humor in him, but he used humor to get through some of the pain. Okay, let's go next to, yes, this is a really tough one, but I thought it was important to see. At this time in the world, there were a lot of murders. There's even a German name for it, Lustmord, murders by men of women, There's a whole book about it, actually, and it was particularly strong in Germany, but also in Mexico. This is based on a cartoon that appeared in a newspaper, a true story of a man who killed his wife or girlfriend because she betrayed him. And when they captured him, he said, "Oh, I only gave her a few small nips." And this what the banner says, a few small nips. And of course, this painting is so stark. She is being ironic and at the same time fully displaying her own pain and agony. And I want you to notice here, especially the paint, the blood, the paint goes out of, she's not only making her own life into art, but she's bringing us into the painting. Her pain is too strong to withstand the framing of, it can't be contained. And I think that this is, and also I want you to notice what other thing is in common with Kafka. He uses many very small, enclosed, claustrophobic spaces. And you see many times she uses this kind of a tight space. And of course, she couldn't get about all that much. And I think, but it also, I think, speaks to the enclosure of their own holding tight, holding those feelings inside. This is another one of her responses of showing her pain. It's when she actually did cut her hair. She had, as you saw in many of the other pictures, long hair that she braided on top of her head. That's what she's known by these days, with jewelry in it. Here, it was after another betrayal, and she cuts her hair, dresses in drag, essentially. The hair is almost alive in this painting. As if it too is in pain. And up there she is, the words to a popular song which said, "If I loved you, it was only for your hair. Now that you're bald, I don't love you anymore." So, she managed to use these cultural things in order to speak her own truth of her own life. This is one that has been less well known. There's other versions of this. It's called Two Nudes in a Forest. And until the last decade, when same-sex love between women was even thinkable, this was always seen as the two sides of Frida, which of course there is the dark and the lighter one. There's also the nurturing and the friendship. And indeed, she had many, many women friends who nurtured her whole life. But we know she also had many sexual affairs with women. And this is one instance. This is also, I don't know, it's in another slide, which if you're interested, I could give you the reference to an article I wrote, which is called Frida's, Kahlo's World Split Open. In one painting, which is a really pretty grim painting, where I think she's trying to speak about her sexual abuse, there is this small version of this floating next to the man who I think she's showing as the perpetrator. So, but it's much too long for me even to show you that painting now, because you couldn't even take it in. It's a very busy, complex painting, but I'm telling you about it. And you see here, there are some roots going down into the earth. She was very aware of the rootedness and the uprootedness of beings and of life. So, and there's that monkey back there is part of the European art tradition. They often had nude women with men peeping at them in the bushes or in the background. So she kind of makes use of that tradition, but makes it her own. She, by the way, had many animals in her care, which we'll come to in another minute. Okay, this is the picture in drag, Kahlo in drag. You can see this high bourgeois Mexican family. She's there at 16 in full drag, even men's shoes, which she wasn't wearing in the one where she's cut her hair. So I just wanted you to see that this impulse is much older in her life than later on, when she especially needed nourishment. So this is one where she had many, she was not able mostly to have a child, carry a child to term. So she had, because of the injuries to her pelvis in that accident, but she did have a few elective abortions because she was worried that if she had a child and she stayed home with the child more and Diego traveled by himself, because she usually traveled with him when he went to the United States or elsewhere, that he would be more philandering than he even was. So that was, she was very ambivalent, even though on one hand, she really wanted a child. On the other hand, she was terrified and ambivalent. And here we see her, this was one of her worst, and it's one of the few paintings in Western art that show an abortion or a miscarriage, that she's lying in blood. The fetus is not right there. The fetus is there. She believes it was a boy. And then there are other aspects, sort of symbols of what this was in Detroit. She hated it there. And you can see the city from afar. Even a piece of machinery is part of what she's tied to. But showing her pubic hair, showing the blood, this was really extraordinary. And really is hardly seen at all. But okay, here is the next theme of that they both share, and one is masks. This is a literal painting of Kahlo's showing herself. I don't know if you can see without my pointing it out. This is the hair of the, quote, real Kahlo. This is the mask, and this is the fake hair, disheveled, not, those are the two parts of her. She holds herself very tightly. That image of the frozen sea within us was also seen in the way she dressed herself, very carefully, very much. So, and here we have real, fake tears coming out of the holes where the real Kahlo was crying, but she can only show it in this third coded kind of a way. She also used, and Kafka used masks in the way he described himself. He was always well-dressed, always tight, always humorous and like dapper. And he really did hide some of the pain. And once he had tuberculosis, of course, it became more visible, but he hid himself away in sanatoria. Here, she had many animals. She literally had a deer in her backyard. She had apes, she had parrots, she had dogs whose lineage went back, way back, hundreds of years in Mexico, little tiny dogs without hair. She had a cat, but she also used an image of an animal to clearly portray herself. In fact, and with arrows, I don't know if you can see, she has 9 arrows, getting back to Saint Sebastian again, that there is a way that her illness or that she feels her life has been a punishment, even though, and I know we're focusing on all the pain, she in between had lots of fun, at least on the surface, and I'm sure she also enjoyed it. And as did Kafka, by the way. I have to say that, but it's hard to show both at the same time. And I'm focusing on what joined them, I believe, was their pain, which they then expressed in their art, and without which I don't think they would have continued to live. This is representing, there's a tradition in Mexico, when someone dies, you put a branch there to symbolize them. And this is another frame that she herself made. And it's as if this deer, which has, by the way, antlers, so it's of the male gender, maybe signaling her homosexuality or her sense of having to have the male component, what she called the male component within her. But it's a very bleak scene. That deer will never see or get to the ocean. And I think that she's trying, it's a cry for help in some ways, that she created this. Kafka, in the meanwhile, used animals. Many of his stories, which maybe you don't know, Investigations of a Dog. This one I'm showing you it's a monologue he wrote. It's short. It's called Investigations of a, no, this is Report to the Academy, because it's an ape who has been captured out in the wilds and is being civilized. And he's reporting to the Academy how he's been civilized. How has he been civilized? He's been given whiskey to drink. He learns to spit. He learns to curse. He learns to pull down his pants. I mean, it's a complete spoof of what it means to become a human. And Kafka, of course, is pointing to those humans who have hurt him. At the same time, imprinted in this is also the Jew who had to assimilate. There were many, many Jews who because of a period of great anti-Semitism, assimilated, but they were only copying or pretending to be something else. And also the homosexual pretending to be straight. I mean, he manages to weave the themes in a coded way into much of his writing. Okay, so they're nurturing. She desperately needed nurturing. This is called My Nurse and I, where and of course, what's particularly striking is not just the milk that's being fed and the milk that's coming from the sky. Apparently, there was a belief among the Indian people that rain is milk from heaven. So she painted it that way. But that milk, that the adult self as a child, I think, speaks profoundly to the desire to be held, to be nourished. And she's showing very plainly, she didn't just miss it as a child, she needs it now. And the fact that it is the Indian side that is providing it is not a surprise given her belief system that, and she only believed that Diego really loved her for the Indian side of her. So just to show you a close-up of that nurse, who is a masked figure too. This is in the same vein, even that there have been many paintings, which I didn't show, where she has her third eye has a little portrait of Diego Rivera in it. She even has one painting where she has half her face is Diego, half her face is her own. Here is a desperate, near the end of her life, a desire for wholeness and being held. So it's the universe. She, toward the end of her life, also moved toward Buddhism. So it's the dark and the light are together holding this whole entity, which is the Mexican with the milk coming from the breast, Kahlo holding her baby, lover, husband, father. I mean, she calls him all of those things. And now he has the third eye. He's carrying the wisdom for both of them. And there's that little dog, that the species that's supposedly very, very, very ancient. She always had one of those dogs. And then I want to, moving as she gets closer to death, this is actually again from her life. She had a skeleton up on her bed like that. And Diego used to make fun of her and say that it was, you know, her lover. And this is they have skeletons like this in different Mexican holidays. In the olden days, they used to detonate these at the time near Easter when they believed that they're blowing up Judas. But in more recent years, they took away that aspect of it, and it's just blowing up people for fun and letting off steam. But you notice here, even when she's in herself dying, the embroidery from there's a kind of a magical realism that the embroidery from the bedspread sprouts and becomes the first greenery I think we've seen that's really green. Much of the other foliage was white and kind of emptied out. So we'll now move on. This is where she puts, instead of Diego, death on her mind. And I think maybe, let's see, I have just very few more, but I want to say something about that one. Yes, I'll just put it on. Yes, this is from her diary. You see how shockingly different. This is a very fat book that you can now buy as a replica, where she just uses ink blots in any which way that she can. And on the right-hand side, oh, actually, that wasn't supposed to be, oh yeah, are you going? No, broken wings. Let me just go back one and see if, okay, we forgot this one, which is, I think, really important, because here she actually had made blots on the page and she just said, the hell with it, I'll make something out of them or around them. There's a lot, she says, I am disintegration. It was after she had to have her one leg amputated at her knee. She already had had toes amputated, and she really felt she was falling apart. She was, by this time, taking maybe even morphine, a lot of alcohol every day, but still she was painting. And then you see over here the head of, this is like the real Kahlo with a leg, and yet there's another Kahlo up there still not disintegrated. So that split between her own sense of self continues even into her death. And then, yeah, that was, well, that's not Kahlo. All right, so then that was the aspects, well, I'm almost making it to the, I have two more pictures that I want to show you. And there are, what follows, and will be very brief, is sort of what is it that I learned when looking at my connection to these two artists? What was in it for me? Why did they keep on? And why didn't I publish this as a book? I only once tried to send it to an agent and they said, oh, it's too bloody. Literally, too much blood and gore. And it was probably a little too academic still, even though I don't think I write all that academic with a jargon. Anyway, but I did also use art in my own healing. So I'm going to show you these, and then I'm going to shut this off and read you just these 2 pages, and then we can have questions. But well, maybe I'll read this first. Epilogue. Some thoughts about myself in relation to my work. My study of Kafka and Kahlo has been my holding space. I think that's important. Their revealing their pain allowed me to work through the traumas that I myself experienced as a child living under the Nazis. It is rather ironic that the pain that they revealed in their art could help me work through my own. There's kind of irony within irony. I was born into a time when Hitler came to power, a threat to Jews everywhere. And by the time I was 5, the Nazis had occupied Vienna, Austria, where I was born, and permeated everything. I could no longer get nurturing and empathic support from my parents because they were very busy trying to survive in that atmosphere. After we escaped the Nazis, my mother grieved for the mother, my grandmother, who was like another mother to me, that she had to leave behind and whom we never saw again. And my father grieved for his sister and her family, my close uncle and aunt and cousins, who were all killed by the Nazis, and friends. The arrest that opens the trial when 2 men, I don't know how many of you remember the trial, if you ever read it in college, 2 men come in to Joseph Kane, they tell him, you are arrested. And they don't tell him why. That happened to me when I was 5 years old. The Nazis came into my house and came and arrested my father. Of course, I could say for the reason, no other reason than that he was a Jew. But, and that was very, very highly traumatic, and is an exact replica of the book. And I had written about Kafka and studied him for years before that even occurred to me. So this is the kind of thing that as I'm looking at these texts again, seeing that. I read a letter that my father wrote. My father mysteriously, and we can talk about that, was released from Dachau and Buchenwald after a year. And he managed to write a letter about his experiences. And in that letter, I couldn't believe it. He describes blood and wounds. I swear it looked like a Kahlo painting or something from a Kafka story. And he even writes that the SS fed schnapps to their underlings so they would beat the Jews more. I mean, it was like out of that Kafka story that has lived with me for so long. And what the men had to do to each other was pretty extreme. So the pain was written on his body in the same way that these artists' pain was written on theirs. Then the other thing I wanted to mention was the Jewish. Both of them were searching for authenticity. Kahlo, to the extent that she let people believe she was Jewish, used Jewishness in some way. Kafka struggled his entire life trying to make sense of what it means to be a Jew, which means truthfully exactly what is my struggle. And you can ask for details a different time. And Kafka didn't succeed, and I decided that my work, this work, is probably my way of making meaning of being Jewish. That, what was it that Rilke said, live the questions. So that's what I'm doing. And most important, and I'm ending with this because it's the most important thing, of course, is the working through of shame. That the healing of the feeling of being an outsider, of not fitting in, of not being wanted. Kafka and his characters felt it. Kahlo felt it her entire life. And the shame of being, for Kafka, a Jew and a closet homosexual, for me, being slated for annihilation evokes incredible shame. And please don't anybody say, but you survived. The two are not antithetical to each other. After survival, when you're a refugee, and I was a refugee twice. Once we moved to Italy, I had to learn a new language. Then we came to the United States, I had to learn a new language. Both made me feel very stupid because I couldn't communicate. We were poor. We were living on donations. We were pitied and looked down upon. We were called greenhorns. So making visible this trauma, externalizing it visually or in writing, helps make a move toward healing and helps lessen the grip of shame. So I want to leave you all with that feeling, whatever you're all carrying within your families, shame must be witnessed and spoken. I think that that has been the most help. So I'm not going to only show you two pictures that I made. One is a drawing that when I was doing, I've done a lot of therapy, but one time I really used a lot of paintings or drawings. So I'm going to show you just two that I really feel are really important to me. One is a pencil drawing, and you can see it was when we arrived in the United States, and I first saw the Statue of Liberty. And I do remember that very clearly. Of course, this is I didn't know that she had steps going up until my first grade teacher took us on a trip up there. But there's my family and there's me. And it's interesting in here, all the cars in New York City, the buildings, the people on the boat. I'm struck, this I made like 20 years ago, maybe 25, how alone I am away from both my parents. And as someone pointed out to me, I have a brother. And if I look very closely, he's there attached to my mother. I am by myself. And that was how I felt. So this is how the unconscious works. I did not say I was going to do this. This is how I felt, and this is what came from my hand. So I just wanted to show you this. And the painting, I don't usually call things, but it's called The Survivor. I took a picture of myself, so why it's a little flimsy. And this is my favorite, I do painting, and my favorite picture of me. Somebody actually wanted to buy it, but I'm not selling it because it feels to me, I mean, I don't think I was copying anybody, but that sense it's not a mask, but it's also the feeling comes out through the eyes. And I think, and I called it self-portrait with red heart, which to me was extremely important as a visualization of everything I was feeling. So I just want to show you those two, what I've got. So that's it for this presentation. And I think time for some questions.
Cuando volvemos, yo paro ahí.
Thank you very, very much. Okay, questions for Evi?
If you have a
Excuse me,
question, raise your
somebody
hand.
is
They'll
talking,
identify you. Don't be afraid of questions.
somebody
I
is
will bring you the
talking out
microphone.
loud so everyone can hear your question.
Podemos ir otro día.
And of course, please identify yourself.
Then the hand will go down right away.
En cualquier lado, seguro.
Mute yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm Amy Schusheim.
Yo
And
la-
I'm wondering what you
al-
think
yo
Kafka
la
meant
compré ahí cuando
by
estuve,
saying
cuando me
there's hope, but
No,
not
porque
for
no
us.
estaba.
Who was the us for Kafka?
I think he was talking about the human condition and that it's like that, he was putting into one sentence both and. He's saying something and negating it at the same time. This is the way he copes with his own, that he wants to have hope. He does have it, but it's there in the universe, just not for us. He also said, like the incomprehensible is incomprehensible, that we already know. Like anything that we can know and experience, he felt was beyond us as humans. That was one of the things he suffered from. I mean, so that if he could touch the hope, then it wouldn't be there because it was within the realm of the human.
Going on here?
That was part of his own psychic pain, aside from the tuberculosis. And also they both, interesting, food was really important to both of them. They both had a lot of, went to doctors all the time, sometimes unnecessarily, but he would chew his food. There was a method of eating called Fletcherization, where you would chew like, I don't know, 20 times. And, but she loved feasts and she loved to cook. So they each in their own way used food for them to calm themselves in some way. Anybody else got a question? Yeah, Roberta.
Hi, Evie. Thanks so much for that. So I was really touched by your commentary at the end and how you felt stupid and alone and all of that. And it made me think about all of the refugees and immigrants we have in this country now. And I'm questioning, I don't know if you want to get that personal, but I'm questioning, how long did it take you to feel that you were no longer alone or part of this society? And can you make any comments about how you feel refugees or immigrants in this country relate to that?
Well, I can just say briefly, it takes a very, very, very long time. You can bury it. And for a long time I did. I used to introduce myself. My name is Evi Beck. I was born in Vienna. I came to New York at age 5, 6, 7, I forgot I was, and just skipped over all of it. So you can live and even think you belong without, in some sense, really belonging. But once you let in some of those feelings, I would say, I'm still working on it, but I would say that it's been incremental, I would say. Every year I do a little more work. And I think these last few years have been extremely more so even than before. Go no. That's translation from Yiddish. Yeah. Yeah, Barbara. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Sandy Schiffers, and I had a question going back to your opening remarks about Frida Kahlo being so popular. Do you think that there's a real understanding of her in some of the, I mean, there's like a sensationalism, you might say, because of the nature of her paintings. And I'm just wondering if you had any reaction to how you think people are viewing her art today. And I did also want to mention that in Richmond, Virginia, the Museum of Contemporary Art right now, everybody's nodding their head. There is a current exhibit. It closes September 28th. I've not been to it yet, but I heard it's really fantastic. So.
Well, the popularization is an interesting question because both Kafka and Kahlo are copied inimitably much, cartoons, jokes, and novels, I think Kahlo's work is probably more taken on the surface, but I don't want to say that the surface isn't in some sense real. She's been taken up by movements toward accepting people whose bodies are not whole, who cannot move. I mean, she's been taken up by many different groups. So I both want to say yes and no. I mean, I think that there's some people know who she is, and some people are just going with what comes to your eyes that you can't take off your eyes from. Yeah, Barbara?
Two things. I Googled whether her father was a Jew, and it's a theory that's been totally discredited. Apparently, genealogical research shows he wasn't. Two, you didn't mention her liaison with Trotsky. Were there paintings from that period?
One painting that is in the National Museum of Women in the Arts, which if you haven't gone to, you should go there. I'm not sure it's on show now. She has a little painting of herself on a stage, and she had an affair with him right under the nose of Rivera and Trotsky's wife. So it wasn't a good thing in the group. But she gave him this painting publicly. I mean, she was very shameless in some ways about asserting herself and her needs. But so that's the one painting. She's like on a stage. It's a very small painting. She's like wearing an orange dress. What? Yeah, it's a painting of herself, no painting of him that she gave to him as a birthday present. But that only took up a tiny portion. Of course, Diego was not very happy with that. He didn't mind her women lovers. He minded the men. Again, not surprisingly. Yeah, Ken, way back.
First of all, thanks. That was just fascinating and so deep and rich. Have you ever thought of bringing a third person? Right now, there's two of them, and there's a lot of dichotomies as you present about them, but I'm wondering if you've thought about in your next lifetime of bringing a third person in and how that might change the understanding, having three rather
Well,
than
actually, I already put myself in there, so that's already three, and I think that's enough for me for one. But thank you for that thought. What's interesting about the third is that in some piece that I'm writing that has not yet seen the light of day, when I sometimes write about this a little bit, stream of consciousness. And one of the things I wrote, I quoted T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. I don't know how many of you remember it if you read it in college. Always toward the end, he quotes Shackleton, the explorer, who always there is a third that walks beside you. And it was the question that Shackleton felt that maybe it was Jesus Christ or some other, but I have thought maybe they are my third. I really did write that down somewhere. So it's interesting that you should pick that up. It's like maybe I sent it to you via the ether. Yeah, well, that's what I'm doing. Just still on my way. All right, well, this is very, so,
Evi, hold on. There's a question from the chat, from the Zoom people. This is from Deborah Rosenfeld. Such a great talk. I'm completely convinced about the confluences between Kafka and Kahlo. I'm wondering if there's any suggestion they might have known one another's work.
well, that's a really good question. I actually researched this because although they're not exactly the same time, it is possible, there's enough they were overlapping. She did have German books in her library. So I did look to see, is there a possibility that she actually knew his work, but I actually don't think so. That would be another whole, would change everything in a way. But also I wanted to say, Barbara, you said about definitive proof that his family wasn't Jewish. First of all, I was a little suspicious that German people were the ones who had to go looking for his lineage to prove it. Well, that's just me. But then I discovered that his mother's, Kahlo's father's mother, so her grandmother, her name was Harriet Kaufman, which is kind of a Jewish name. And I wondered whether or not she didn't convert or the family didn't convert because that was very common in the 19th century in Europe. There was so much anti-Semitism. Kafka got his job because he had to pay in somebody, you couldn't just do whatever you wanted to as a Jew. So I'm not convinced that there isn't some Jewish element there. And I'll tell you one other thing. A woman I know who's a very good scholar wrote a book just like yesterday about Jewish women. And she has Gertrude Stein, and she includes Frida Kahlo. And she asked me, I said, don't do that, And she did. I have not read. I mean, she kind of shows that because she surrounded herself with Jews and wanted to be, it's a wannabe Jew, that maybe we should consider her a Jew. I think that's absurd, but all right. Yes. Well, we could be here all night, so let's go home and.